This is James Taylor, and you're listening to The Creative Life. The Creative Life podcast is a show created for you, the creative. If you're looking for inspiration, motivation, and advice while at home, at work, or on your daily commute, then this show is for you. Each episode brings you a successful creative, whether that's a musician, writer, artist, designer, performer, educator, or creative entrepreneur. They share their journey, their successes, their failures, their creative process, their insights, and much, much more. This episode is sponsored by C-School, the online school for creativity training. If you'd like to unleash your creative potential and access a free Creativity Blueprint training series, then just head over to c.school. That's www.c.school for your free training series. Today I speak with Brandon Rochon about the future of advertising. We talk about his work with brands including Red Bull and Samsung, the 4 Ps of advertising, and the rise of the makers. Enjoy this episode. Hey there, it's James Taylor, and I'm delighted today to welcome onto the show Brandon Rochon. Brandon Rochon has spent his life building some of the world's most loved brands. He started his career on the hard streets of Madison Avenue, where he worked on Hennessy, Lugz Shoes, and Sapporo Beer, then spent time in New York City before he picked up and moved to Europe, where he joined the award-winning TBWA Paris and worked on brands like Absolut Vodka, McDonalds, PlayStation, Heineken, and Nissan. Then it was off to Ogilvy Paris, where he became the global creative director of Coke Zero, while working on other brands such as Louis Vuitton and Perrier. And finally is back to the US as the Senior Vice President Global Creative Director of Samsung Electronics, helping usher the brand into the pop culture icon it has become to date. Currently, Brandon is Managing Chief Creative Officer at Kastner Partners, which is the agency of record for Red Bull. And it's my great pleasure to have him on the show today. So welcome, Brandon.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here.
So share with everyone what's going on in your world just now.
Oh man, so much, like almost too much, but it's like, there's always that time in the creative life where there's a lot happening, but not much going on. So I'm kind of in there, like we just trying to figure out new ways and new things. Everyone's at Cannes this week celebrating creativity. So wish I was there, but somebody has to hold down the fort and do the work. But other than that, man, just loving life in sunny California. Best place to be.
So you had a great quote I saw, which you said, I have always believed that people don't invite brands into their houses. They invite people in, which I love that quote. So have you always had this sense of like this kind of humanistic sense of what brands need to be? Or was this something that kind of developed over the years working in advertising?
I think I've always had it. I think when I looked at advertising, it's funny, I always tell people I'm an advertiser who hates advertising, right? Because it's so interruptive. And I'm like, yo, dude, I was just sitting here enjoying my whatever show I was enjoying, and you just gonna throw a commercial that has completely out of context. Yeah. So I always realized that it was about people to begin with. And I kept seeing like the reason I got into it was I was like, yo, we got to get this humankind place where we understand that it's not about product, it's about people. And so it just kind of throughout the years I learned, my dad always told me learn the rules first before you can break them. Mm-hmm. So I was like, well, let me learn the rules and then I'm going to break them because it has to get way more humanistic, way more built to humanity and about people before we ever start talking to product. So yeah, it's always been a part of me.
So where did you go and learn the rules? Where did it begin for you in terms of learning how, the kind of fundamentals for the advertising industry, how advertising works, how building brands work? Where did it start?
So I first started out at, university was like the first place where I got, a degree in marketing and communication. Then I went to portfolio school, which I realized was just another place to learn the rules. And then I started the world of advertising in New York and realized that this was all a bunch of just people who were trying to make a ton of money and not realizing that there is a true place for art and commerce. And so I learned a lot, from just working on the Procter & Gamble's. One of my first projects I did was for Procter & Gamble, which happened to win a D&AD, which really taught me it was about trust your gut. My mentor always told me, he said, you have to have the heart to do this stuff. If you don't have the heart for it, the passion, because 90% of this is passion, only 10% is talent. And then if you don't have the heart and then the gut, like the gut instinct to know what's right and how to truly connect to people. And then he said, excuse my French, but the balls to pull it off. That's the only way you'll ever be great as a creative that makes money in this industry. So I really wanted to figure out a way to understand the business side of it and understanding that we have ROIs, we have matrices that we have to people, we have product we have to push, and they're all looking for the bottom line. But I realized that the more and more clients were focused on the bottom line, I realized they were setting their sights too low. And I really spent my whole career trying to get them to look up and to see what the world had to offer and how their true brand could not be just a leech onto culture, but truly drive and become a part of culture. So it was really hard, like we did it with, you come in and you learn from like the McDonalds and the PlayStations and the Absolutes, and we were doing that. And then the first time I really remember when I kind of got it was we were pitching this idea to Nissan for Nissan Europe for small cars, and small cars is something that's very different than America. In America, we were all driving the SUV, and in Europe, it was all about the small cars. So I was like, whoa, this is completely different and mind blowing. But I realized that, if we can figure out how to get people to connect with this brand, not from an advertising standpoint, but from a true storytelling standpoint, then we could truly get them to engage with the brand and go away from advertising and go way more into storytelling. And that's what I realized the difference was. There were people who were making ads, and I realized I wanted to be a storyteller.
So one of the brands that you work with today is, I think, one of the best brands. There's a storyteller with Red Bull, and a friend of mine worked with Red Bull, not on the advertising, more on the technology side of things. Mm-hmm. And Red Bull's, he told me something. I remember going to the Red Bull offices in Santa Monica, and he told me, he said, well, you have to remember about Red Bull. Everyone thinks Red Bull is a soft drinks company. It's actually a media company that makes its money 100%. From selling soft drinks. And that was a real kind of like, okay. And then that kind of changed my thinking about a lot of, in terms of like branding and in terms of, I think actually in some style of the music industry, in some styles of music, like hip hop, they kind of get this instinctively, but other styles less so. So when I'm thinking if there's someone that's listening to this just now, who is that entrepreneur starting that business, or is that speaker that has a message they want to share with the world, or as an author, or as an artist, as a designer, should they be taking some of that Red Bull special thing and thinking of themselves more as a media company and not just as something that produces something?
100%. I mean, that is what the beauty of Red Bull is. Like, it's, we always talked about Red Bull being the 21st, like the iconic brand of the 21st century, because all marketers are like, whoa, how can we do what Red Bull did? And your friend was absolutely right. Red Bull is a media company that happens to sell liquid in a can to help build all the other properties that they're doing. And it's a switch that I had to make as well, with understanding that your brand is more than just a product. Your brand is a platform. And that's what Red Bull does very, very well. What I try to do with all of my clients is, let's not talk about the campaign. Let's talk about the platform you're building, because people now constantly want to be involved in a platform. Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, LinkedIn, Skype. Like, there's all these different platforms that are now building and bubbling up that really are starting to change the way we as humans interact with each other and connect with each other. So if you're going to build something, don't just always say, don't look at 1 + 1 is equals 2. Look at 1 and 1 is 11. Because you realize, what are you going to add to it? So you have a product, and that's cool and that's great. But there's so many other things other cultural things that you can start a conversation in based off with the root of whatever your art is. So Red Bull's art was making an energy drink, and there was no such thing as an energy drink before Red Bull. But what they really saw really quickly was it was way more about the fans. Something that I always say is we want to turn consumers into fans. So people love Red Bull, and they love the stuff Red Bull does, whether that is a Flutog, whether that is air race, whether that is Formula One. I mean, there's so many other things that Red Bull does that the can is like almost secondary. And when you talk to them, they're really big on the mindset of, we just want to make friends, and we want to do the coolest thing with our friends. And that's just a great mindset to have as a person who's building a brand, to think about, I want to make fans. I don't want to make consumers, because consumers are fickle really, really quick. They'll love you today, hate you tomorrow. Fans love you forever, no matter what you go through. They're there.
They stay around. They'll buy that difficult third album that no one in the media loves.
Yes.
But they stick with you through those difficult third albums. But one thing I was always interested with Red Bull, obviously you had this mega brand at the top, but it's in terms of how they interact with different communities. So, I see they're interacting with, let's say, musicians in one way. They're also interacting with skateboarders in another. They're interacting with people who are into street art in another kind of way as well. So I'm wondering from your perspective as the kind of person that has to kind of be sitting and really thinking about the advertising, how you speak to each of these groups and reach each of these groups, how much were you having to really define very different types of messaging and everything for those groups? Or did you think about it from a different perspective?
Completely different perspective. I was like, it's all about, for me, it's always about collaboration, because great artists collaborate. Whether it's in music, whether it's in fashion, whether street culture, it's always collaborations are always the best. And so what we realized, to Red Bulls, to give them just the mad props, is they're really good at it, is walking into all these different subcultures and wanting to elevate the people in the subculture. So it's not like, let me go in and kind of colonize your tribe. Like most marketers do, is they come in as this imperialistic thought and they just want to like decimate a tribe and take all the resources. Red Bull is very good at coming in and saying, hey, let's talk to the tribe members and see what we can do to help elevate. So what do you want to do? What are things that you are interested in? How can we help you? How can we literally give you wings to elevate what you are trying to do and make you the champion, not our brand the champion? We want to make you the champion, which is such a great heart to come from. Yeah. And it literally changes everything of how you look.
Now, one of the companies that you worked with, I was watching a thing the other day. It was an old video on YouTube. David Ogilvy, he was talking about Confessions of an Ad Man, yeah. And it was like he was filming in his country house in France, and it was like, actually, I think it should be required watching of any marketer because it was brilliant stuff. Yeah. So you worked for Ogilvy Paris, but you also worked for Leo Burnett. And I'm wondering, so Leo Burnett was kind of coming up in, I guess, around about the same time as Ogilvy. What was the big differences in terms of cultures in those two kind of Goliaths, in those industries?
It's funny because when I look at Paris, Ogilvy Paris, I wasn't at the mothership. To Leo Burnett, I was at the mothership. So we were just like, this rogue little shop in Paris that wanted to change the world. And because we weren't in like I said, the hub, but we weren't in New York, where it all kind of stemmed from, and then like London being the next one, we were the offshoot, like brother that nobody wanted to talk about. So we got to get away with stuff that no one else got away with, because we had like this ride or die kind of mentality, and it was like about the work, and we wanted to make the best creative in the world, and we wanted to make art. We wanted to make art that sold things, but we wanted to really be a storyteller. 100% storytelling and provocative and edgy. And, we weren't trying to be cool. We were trying to be commentary in the world, like have a viewpoint on the world and what you want to say today. So that was Ogilvy. That was a great, just beautiful place because we were building it in Paris. Before I got to Paris, we really weren't known. And then the team that the creative director built there was just a phenomenal team. Everyone has gone on to do some amazing things. To when I went to Leo Burnett, it was the idea was so much more like business. Like I walked in and I was like, oh, advertising is a business. To where in Paris, we were just artists, like smoking cigarettes and drinking wine, like pontificating about the world and what was wrong and horrible in the world. So when I got to Leo Burnett, I was like, it was always about like, yo, we got to make this money. We got to move this client. We got to build a brand that is going to literally show the numbers and moving, because we had very different clients at Leo Burnett. It was way more like these tried true old like foundation of advertising brands like the McDonalds and the Kellogg's. And it was just a wild ride. But the culture, when you think about the culture, it's hard to compare because we were so small in Paris. Where we were in Paris, we were maybe 300. And at Leo Burnett, we were like maybe 1,300. So our creative department was just as big as our entire Ogilvy Paris office. So it's really hard to do when you have so many people coming in trying to put their mark on the work. It kind of gets lost, because then I realized that it was way more vying for position in Chicago than at Paris. It was like people supporting each other to be the greatest that they could be. And that was a difference in the culture.
So in those kind of cultures as well, I'm always kind of interested where a lot of the work that, a lot of our listeners are doing, they're just kind of in their own place. They're just focused. They're kind of creating solo. They're creating on their own. Maybe they'll work with subcontractors and different folks, but the nature of in the advertising industry, you're creating as part of a team. It's much more of a team group kind of dynamic that's going on. So were there any key things that you learn in terms of how, when you have a bunch of really creative people in a room, and so that's not the biggest challenge, but how you can ensure that you can get the best from those people, and you can not only just help them find their ideas, but develop their ideas and really help them kind of flourish, help them fly, as you were saying with the Red Bull.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what I learned was every individual is unique, and what you have to do is you can't put creativity in a corner and say, okay, now create something great. Is you got to give people the freedom to be who they are and say, there is no such thing as, that is wrong. It's always, it's not right. It's not wrong. What can we do to help make it more right? So what I realized is when you get a whole bunch of creatives in the room, the cool thing about creatives is we love to spar, right? We love to flex the creative muscles. We love to try to out-create each other. But the beauty of that, you got to figure out how to foster that healthy competition with, at the same time, letting people and understanding the strengths of everybody in the room. So if I have somebody who is really, really deep in street culture, and I have someone then next to someone who is very deep into industrial design, I can't sit there and be like, well, the street culture person is going to be the more right one. Towards now, like, how do I put these two people together and what could they come up with? So it's totally like freeing. Like my whole thing, my whole process is freeing creatives. Like, how do we just take the shackles you have on yourself, and why not? Who said we couldn't do that? So now you come in and create, and what I do is I help guide you and steer you so that a client will buy it, so that they'll pay for us to make it.
So that in trying to kind of foster that culture, that climate, were there any things that you've taken from your time at Leo Burnett and obviously some of the organization into what you're doing now at Kastner Partners, where you obviously have this incredible client as one of your clients, Red Bull, but I know you also have Adidas and other great clients as well. Are there things that when you kind of came into that organization as the managing chief creative officer, you said, listen, there's a couple of things I want to build here into the culture that we need to change. And you obviously mentioned diversity is one of them, diversity of views, but were there other things that you had there as well?
Well, yeah, I wanted to break up the process, right? Like I wanted to say, like, let's challenge the process, because doing the same thing expecting a different result is common insanity. So if there's a process of how we brief and how we write briefs and how we come up with briefs and how we talk about the jumping off point, I said, we got to get super real. And so I said, we're going to talk about, if you're going to talk to me first about ideas, we got to talk about mama truths. Tell me something that moves me. Like, you want to impress me, but you can inspire me. So when we talk about it from a very beginning point, it's like, tell me a story and make it personal to you. Because if it's not personal to you, it will never connect with somebody else. Because what I learned being an American in Paris, where I couldn't use language or puns or inside jokes, was those universal truths, right? We all love, we all hate, we all envy, we all lust. We all have similar moments that happen in life. They may not be the exact same moments, but we all go through the same emotions in those similar moments. So first, when you start to tell me your idea, make it personal. Because as soon as you make it personal, it instantly is going to connect, because it connected with you first, not pulling an idea straight out of the air because it doesn't happen. The more we can make it connect personally to you, now we can start figuring out how to tool it to make it connect personally to a more universal, wider audience. And Red Bull, like Leo Burnett taught me. Like, Leo Burnett was really good at that, because they taught me this thing called the 4 Ps. You know, is where I kind of tweaked it and kind of like massaged it and kind of made it my own. But the 4 Ps, and I was like, oh yeah, I know the 4 Ps of marketing. And I was like, nah, it's not the 4 Ps of marketing. It's the 4 Ps of people, right? And the first P is just people. We must understand that it's about people first. Anything that we create as artists, whether it is you're creating a song, whether you're creating a movie, whether you're creating an installation, a piece of street art, designing shoes, or creating ads, you're doing it for people. You want people to connect with it and start a conversation around it. So first, let's talk about the people, right? And I remember working at Coca-Cola. I remember walking in one day and we were talking about this big campaign, and they were, Coca-Cola is one of the greatest companies in the world. And we were sitting there and I said, hey, well, this is all great. We're talking about what I call shiny happy assholes. And the world is not full of shiny happy assholes. And I told them, I said, hookers drink Coke too. And the look on their face was like, what? How dare you? I can't believe you said it. I said, I'm not trying to say we sell Coca-Cola to hookers, but we must understand that they are going through things and they are living life and they have dreams and hopes like everyone else. And if we can't understand how to talk to the least of us, how dare we talk to the rest of us? And that really came from like you understanding that people part of it. Then the next P is purpose. What purpose do we have as a product to be talking to these people, right? If you were just trying to sell a can, people got bills to pay, right? People are losing loved ones. They're figuring out what they're trying to do with their lives. Like, what do they want to do next? So if we just going to try to sell some water, or we're going to try to sell some shoes, and we're going to try to sell a car, we got to understand that we want to talk about purpose. What purpose does our brand, our company have? It better be more than just selling a product. Then the third P is participation. We live in a world that is so connected. And this is what we started talking about earlier, like platforms. How do we get people to participate in it? Because no longer can we speak at you as a consumer. We must have a conversation with you. And this is something Red Bull does very well, is it gives its brand to the people. They let the people become so enthralled and so enthusiastic about it. And they have a conversation with those people to help decide where's the brand going to go next? Like, where should we be going? What areas are we not looking at? Instead of some big time marketers with some fancy degrees sitting in a room looking at some spreadsheets saying, well, we think that, we should be over here. So how do you start to have participation, two-way conversations, whether that is doing something that is, how to get people involved in it, like a flute tog, which is super participatory, or whether it's something as if like, a little game that you play on mobile. And then the last P is populism, right? If it can't be popular, I always say, if it can't make headlines, it won't meet your bottom line. And so that's what I really, really like. I put all those things together. I came here to Kastner. I was like, that is our philosophy. That is how we live life. It is all about what are we doing to move culture? And hopefully our brands can get on board.
Now, tell us, as your kind of fascinating journey through working with all these incredible brands and these great creative teams, but can you tell us about a time when you worked on a project, maybe worked with a client, and you gave this, your heart and your soul, but for whatever reason, it didn't work out like you'd hoped? And more importantly, what were the lessons that you took from that experience?
Oh my God, there's so many. You realize that every day, as a creative, you're like, every day I'm failing. I'm just trying, hopefully failing forward. But I remember it was one of the first projects that I had for Samsung, and it was this huge project, right? It was kind of like, this was like my coming out party. And I went in and I talked to them. It was just this little brief that we got, and it was like a little small budget. And I was always like, ideas win. I don't care about the money. We're going to come with ideas. And so we presented this idea that was amazing, and it cost way more than the little budget happened. But we talked them into it, and they were like, okay, go. And I was like, oh, I'm finally going to make culture. It was for this big CES event. And, I was like, music is such a big part of who I am and what I love. So I'm always trying to find like who's next and upcoming, because I believe music tells stories. Where a video fills a screen, music fills a room. So, we got this this big celebrity that was up and coming, and he was just really, really big. And then all of a sudden we were like, we went around the world. We were shooting for like 20 something days in like 17 countries. It was this huge production. And we finally get to the moment where we're about to go to do the event. And something happens with the artist. This thing that I did not know, once again, from social, that he used to wear this bandana, right? And that was like his signature thing. And my client is in Korea getting ready to get on a plane to fly to Vegas for CES, where we were doing this huge thing. And she calls me and she says, hey, Brandon, we got to cancel the artist. And I was like, why we got to cancel the artist? I was like, we 3 days away and we millions of dollars into this. And she was like, he wears this bandana. And do you know what the bandana is? And I was like, no, I don't. He goes, well, it is the imperial flag of Japan. And I'm like, okay, the imperial flag of Japan. She was like, no, Brandon. She was like, do you know what the imperial flag of Japan is to a Korean? And I was like, I don't. She goes, it's like the Nazi flag. And I was like, oh, oh my gosh. I was like, okay. I'm so sorry. Didn't know that. So I'm like on the phone with like managers and agents and artists. And, I was like, how can we turn this into something positive? I was like, yo, here's a great conversation we can have about understanding different cultures and understanding that it's not always about our viewpoint, but sometimes we must understand other people's viewpoint. And the artist was like, oh, I'm so sorry. So good. I won't wear it anymore. So got the client to say, okay, cool, great, fine, do it. Then as I hung up the phone, my phone is going off and there's all of these alerts coming to my phone of this article that just are this headline news that just dropped. Because anytime you do anything with an artist, we always kind of like ping to see what's going on. And it was over Christmas and he got arrested. And I was like, this is horrible. Like, I can't. I just got off the phone. Like, I literally saved what I thought was a huge, just like melting disaster. And now I'm definitely not coming back from this one. I can't. So the client automatically, she's like walking on the plane down. She's like, nope, it's over. It's canceled. But we, like I said, spent millions of dollars. So she's like, fix it, make it work. They're not going to be in it anymore. I'll see you in 2 days. So had to scramble the team. All of a sudden, yeah, we pulled it off. It wasn't as great as I wanted it to be, and I knew it was going to be. But what it is it's funny because you see when trials come, the best people you want around you is creatives. Because when you get, when it hits the fan and it's about to go down, and it's like either we going to sink or we going to swim, creatives are like, yo, what if we did this? What if we did this? What if we did? And not just create, like I'm talking about producers and set designers and everyone started, how can we salvage this? And we did it and we pulled it off and it was like the big show. It was my coming out party and it was the most stressful part of my life ever.
But you can understand from that story why so many great film directors, they work with the same editor or same cinematographer time and time again. They're often team. I mean, I was just watching Judd Apatow just did a course for masterclass on comedy. Yes. And you notice he's basically working with the same people all the time because they've got your back when those times when stuff's not working and okay, this budget isn't quite where we want it to be. And there's those things cause you built that trust, that intimacy with a group of people. There's obviously, I'm guessing there's also downsides to that because people can become a little bit kind of stuck in a groove and complacent and you can have to, you're kind of like move them around and keep them, flexible.
Yes,
but there's a lot of benefits to having those people around you can trust.
100%. Like I always tell people now in advertising, I'm like, you don't need as an art director, because like I'm an art director by trade. I'm like, I don't need a copywriter. I need a producer. I need someone who can listen to a vision and help me figure out how to pull it off, and then add to it and build upon it. Right? I need makers. Like my whole thing now is I don't need people who can just concept. I need people who can go out there and make it. Like I will fire everybody in my agency and I will hire directors. I will hire songwriters. I will hire people who truly create. And that is where I think the shift of advertising is going. We must be makers. So anybody who is a director and like as a young up and coming director, editor, illustrator, give me a call because I think they are the future of this business because we can no longer sit around and talk about what we want to create. We just got to go out and create it.
And it's funny because that word creativity is it gets used for lots of different things now. But if you go way back to the ancient Greeks, they didn't use the word creativity. Their word for it was making. It's basically making stuff. It's like now we've kind of got into this idea like creativity is all in the head. But it's not. You're doing stuff which is both art and there's a huge amount of craft and there's business there as well. What can you tell us about maybe a key insight or a light bulb moment in your life and your creative journey? A time when you went, oh, okay, this is the kind of work I want to do, or this is kind of what I want to leave, that dent I want to leave in the world.
For sure. There was a time when I was working, we were in a meeting with Paramount. And it was so funny because as you're sitting there as the creative director, listening and, you're used to seeing other partners as vendors, right? And Paramount was sitting there and we're talking about this huge campaign we're doing and multiple things because I wanted it to be social and filmic and not commercially. And I'm listening to what they're talking about, right? And I'm sitting there with my client and I'm like, oh snap, they are the future of advertising. I was like, advertising needs to watch out because Hollywood's going to take its job because they are amazing storytellers and they can get it done. And they have amazing connections, not just to celebrities, but just amazing talent. And so at that moment, I was like, okay, we have to figure out how to go from advertising and branding to not just branding entertainment, which is what I found out at there. I was like, okay, we got to get to branding entertainment. So let's do branding entertainment. But then from that, I realized that, oh no, we got to turn brands into entertainment properties themselves. Hence why I left it all to come and run Red Bull. You see, it all makes sense. How it all.
Yeah, and you're seeing obviously Red Bull TV, and there's all the kind of stuff that's going on there, and so they're fully embracing not just immediate. There's an entertainment empire.
Exactly, and then we must do it as an agency. You know, I said I want to talk about when I took over Samsung. I went to Samsung and I said, you know, they're like, well, Brandon, how do we get in Hollywood? What do you think? Give us a strategy and tell us how we do it. And so I went back and I thought about it and I flew to Korea and I said, this is how you get into Hollywood. Stop doing product placement. I said, we're going to go to Sundance and we're going to buy 5 films that are short format to play on the mobile screen because the new big screen is the mobile screen. And you have over 250 million subscribers. That's more than Canal Plus. That's more than the BBC. That's more than Al Jazeera. That's more than HBO. So if we start making content, which is snackable, stackable, we can totally own this thing that you make called a mobile device. And then I realized I didn't want to build an agency. I really wanted to build a media company. I wanted to build a Vice. Because I was like, I love what Vice was doing and the storytelling that was happening. And I saw what they were doing on HBO, the HBO format, not the Viceland format, which is the old linear TV, which I think is where they pivoted wrong. But if they would have really kept into that so snackable, stackable, 2-minute, 3-minute long content that was super engaging, people just want to consume more and more of it, that's the future of storytelling. Brands need to figure out how to not interrupt your viewing pleasure, but become part of your viewing pleasure.
Now, you've just given me my phrase for the day. Snackable, stackable. I'm definitely going to be using that for the rest of this day.
All right.
So obviously you're always kind of seeing what's kind of going on in terms of trends, especially when it comes to mobile as well. Is there like a particular mobile app or an online tool that you find really useful for the kind of work that you do and for your creative process?
Well, I mean, it's always like I look at YouTube all the time, right? Because YouTube is the new channel. It's the new cable. And everyone and what people are doing and all these makers, like we're saying, let's call them makers, what these people are making and the fanfare they're getting with nothing, just unboxing. Like, I'm a big sneakerhead and you watch these unboxing videos and we should do it for Samsung and iPhones is this person who is sitting there who has a fan following, all they're doing is unpacking the products and they're getting millions of views and they have millions of subscribers. And I'm like, oh snap. People can become their own network with mobile. The democratization of media through mobile and through the internet, through things like podcasts. Now people no longer have to go through the gatekeepers to build an audience. And what brands need to do is they're like, we just need to find the right audience. And
I think that also that relationship. It was funny. I just ran a big online summit. I interviewed 120 of the world's best professional speakers, keynote speakers, and I ran it. We had like about 10,000 attendees on this online summit I ran, and I was speaking at an event just afterwards. And some people came up to me who had attended this online summit and watched some of those interviews I'd done with these great speakers, and the conversation they were having with me, I was having with them. It was like we'd known each other forever. It was like a totally different level of conversation than you would have, like if you were going into certain brands or certain things as well. And that kind of just really wow. I mean, it's a huge privilege you also have because everyone's time is so fragmented with different things. That is such, that key resource that we all have a limited amount of is our time. Yep. The privilege that you have as a brand or as a thought leader or as an expert or a musician or whatever the thing is, to have that piece of time from that person, that's a very, very valuable thing.
Very valuable. And the funny thing about it is more people are giving their times to more things. So we didn't get more time. We just got more things. So what are you going to do to truly be a part of, like I always talk about, there's this thing called prime time. Like there's this thing where everyone's like, oh, prime time television. And I'm like, prime time has become personal prime time. Like you decide what you want to watch, when you want to watch it, no interruptions. What are you going to give your time to? But yet people are constantly on their phones and they're constantly scrolling and liking things and sharing things and commenting on things. So actually, in actuality, if we look at where we are as a society now, we give way more time to things that don't benefit us directly than we ever have in the history of mankind.
Now, I'm going to go old school with you as we start to finish up here.
Come on.
If you could only recommend one book to our listeners and also one record or one album to our listeners, what would they be?
That's hard, man. My book, the one book that I would recommend. Oh my God, you get me, man. Like this is a soul searching. Man. I would say the one book I would recommend someone to read is A Purpose-Driven Life by Rick Warren. To understand that it told me that your life has purpose. And there's only a purpose that you are here to do. And so you finding that, and that everything you do is for a purpose, not just aimlessly wandering around the world. So yes, A Purpose-Driven Life by Rick Warren. And then an album. Oh, there's so many great ones. I'm going to say Lauryn Hill Unplugged.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Because what she knew of Lauryn Hill from the Fugees and all that, and she just was vulnerable. And the way that she talked about life and the way that she sang those songs, the way it spoke to me, to truly be stripped down and just you and your craft, right? Because when it's you and your craft in a very raw state, you have to give all of you. None of the Hollywood magic, none of the studio magic, none of the beautiful lights in museums. It's just you and your raw talent. And there's so much more of you that you have to give. And I think artists have to, and creators and makers have to go back to the rawness to get there. So that would be my two suggestions.
Great. We'll put those links here on the show notes as well. And a final question for you, Brandon. I want you to imagine tomorrow morning you wake up and you have to start from scratch. So you have all the tools of your trade, all the knowledge and skills you've acquired over the years, but no one knows you and you know no one. What would you do? How would you restart?
Like I said, I would first of all be thankful because starting over again is we get afraid to start over, but sometimes we just need to restart. But yes, if I had to do it all over again, I would first and foremost remember all the people that have crossed my path who poured into me to make me great. Right. And what I learned from them and taking little pieces of the wisdom that they have imparted in me and try to figure out, okay, what is next? And I think the next thing would be is a brand studio, right? I'd be like, I'm starting a brand studio. I'm not like, I'm getting, like I said, that makers. I'm gonna get a whole bunch of makers. We're gonna sit in a room and we're gonna be like, what do we want to tell the world today? What do we want to make? And how do we get brands to pay for it? But when we're going to make it, we're not going to come out with this retainer-based business, all this other stuff. It's like, let's get all of the malarkey out of the way and get back to creating things to get people to come into it, and come at it from a very startup entrepreneurial mentality. Right? I think a lot of times when we get big and we get to that, I guess, arrived. And it's funny when you talk to people who have arrived, we always say we're just beginning because we are all entrepreneurs at heart. And we're always looking for what can we do next? What can we do to change something next? So with that whole startup entrepreneur mentality I'm like, where's the hole in the world? Like, what does the world need and how can I fill it? So that's why I talked about the snackable, stackable content, where I know mobile is number one. And I would sit there and say, hey, how do we become the next Viacom, but for the mobile age? How do we start to curate and create with all these makers who are doing it, whether you look at Tastemade, you look at, like I said, YouTube, you look at Instagram famous people, like we call it Insta fame. Like, how do we get those people and say, yo, let's build content, not commercials, because I'm a brander and I build brands, whether that's for people, whether that's for product, whether that's for philosophy, whether that's for ideology, whatever it is, let's make beautiful content that moves culture, made from makers that elevates brands in the hearts and minds of people. And that would be it. That's what I would do.
Now, if there's any makers listening to this, you give a bit of a shout out for some, you're looking for folks, for makers. Where's the best place for them to go and to learn more about you and to connect with you?
So hit me up, on LinkedIn, which is Brandon Rochon. You can hit me up on Instagram, which is Mr. Rochon. And then, check out Kastner and Partners .us. And then that's actually going to change pretty soon to Kastner.agency. So keep the lookout for that. And by any means, I constantly love makers and people who are doing it to reach out to me, because we have to look out for each other. It's all about opening the door. And once we get here, we must make sure that we reach back and do it for others because someone did it for us. So yes, all you makers out there listening, come get at me. And if I can't do something for you, I'll know somebody who at least can.
Well, Brandon Rochon, thank you so much for coming on the show today, and thank you for sharing all about your creative life. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you.
Absolutely, anytime.
Hey, James Taylor here again. And if you're interested in living a more creative life, then I'd love to invite you to join me as I share some of the most successful strategies and techniques that high-performing creatives use. I put them all together in a free downloadable ebook that you can get by going to jamestaylor.me. That's jamestaylor.me to get your free downloadable ebook on creativity.